No government on earth should be allowed to do this. This idea that the digital ruble will always be voluntary, and come on, how naive do you have to be? I think many Russians don't even know that the digital ruble exists.
Let's go to the digital transformation. I think I started following what was going on around digital in Russia more than a year ago when I heard that Moscow was going to come up with a digital ruble. Shortly after that, Moscow introduced face-pay payments in the metro, then it started to prepare digital ID cards, and now we are at the stage where Russia has a central database for collecting biometric data. Children in some schools pay for their lunches with a palm print and so on. How was it happen that Russia has become so progressive in this respect? Is Russia becoming another China? And who the hell is Herman Gref?
So Herman Gref is a very, very interesting character. He's not ethnically Russian, he's German. His family was relocated during the Second World War from Germany to Kazakhstan. And in the 90s, he was part of this sort of, St. Petersburg gang that Putin was part of. And he came to Moscow basically with Putin and also with Nabiullina, who is the central bank chairman. And Gref just had this incredible career where he started off as some sort of deputy prime minister of property management, I think. And within a few years, he just sort of, his career just skyrocketed. He was, a few years after coming to Moscow, he was on the board of directors of Aeroflot and all these other companies, and he was eventually appointed CEO of Sberbank, which is Russia's largest partly state-owned bank. And he was also made a member of the board of directors at the World Economic Forum. He wrote the preface or the introduction of Klaus Schwab's The Fourth Industrial Revolution. He is the locomotive, he's the engine behind so much of what has been happening in Russia, especially over the since the arrival of the pandemic. First of all, I mean, it's remarkable to even imagine it, but Sberbank played a very central role in the development of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine, which very few people know about, but it's like an oligarch shot, It's like a rich banker shot, and Sberbank was hired by the Russian government to help distribute Sputnik V. It's very weird, but the larger point here is that Sberbank is actually known as Sber now. So it's not just a bank. They sort of rebranded in September, I believe, of 2022, and now they say that they're a universe of services, right? So there's Sber food, Sber whatever.
Sber AI.
Yeah, Sber AI, exactly, yeah.
They have also Sber Health.
They do have Sber Health. There's many. I think there's 15 different Sber. They have all of these different subsidiaries under the Sber umbrella. And one of the things that they've been very, very active in is artificial intelligence. And again, when sort of the pandemic narrative came to Russia, and this was in February of 2022. So actually a full month before Moscow went into lockdown, Herman Gref came out and said, there's this COVID stuff coming. We are working closely with our Chinese colleagues to develop facial recognition cameras that can recognize you even if you're wearing a mask. And why is a bank doing this? Why would a bank be involved in this kind of technology? So yeah, and you mentioned, for example, ladushki, which means little palms in Russian. But yeah, it's basically a biometric system for school children to pay for their school lunches. And they've been testing that, and the test started, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. They are just on every level, like with sustainable development goals, for example. For some reason, Sberbank is involved with that, like helping regional governments and cities fulfill their UN Sustainable Development Goals. Why would Sberbank do that? Like, what does Sberbank have that gives them these special powers, right? And Gref is really at the forefront of all this stuff. And you know, I think there's this narrative that after the Ukraine, the not war started, that this was a way to shake up the Russian government and kick out the traitors, and it would be more patriotic. Gref is doing fine. He had a conference with Putin maybe in, you know, 6 months ago, where they sat next to each other and laughed and talked about all the great plans that Gref had for the digitalization of Russia. And so, yeah, if you want to know what's happening in Russia, you should read about Herman Gref and Sberbank, and that's what's really driving a lot of the unfortunate public policy in Russia. It's privatized control mechanisms from a former or maybe current board of directors of the World Economic Forum.
Okay. Well, if I'm not mistaken, last week the State Duma passed a package of laws on the digital ruble. For now, it will be used by employees of the Russian central bank and their entourage. Then comes the second phase and so on. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the State Duma finalized, ratified this bill that created the legal framework for the digital ruble. It should be noted, though, that the digital ruble was actually, the introduction was accelerated. It was supposed to actually be, it's about a year, they introduced it about a year earlier than they originally intended. Why they decided to do that, the Russian government claims that the digital ruble will help them bypass sanctions. And I think there's a lot of reasons why people should be, like with any CBDC, be very concerned about the digital ruble.
The Russian daily Izvestia wrote that within 3 to 5 years the digital ruble could be used for social payments, including pensions. Alexei Moseyev, Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation, expressed that the digital ruble is a substitute for cash. Also, Sergei Shvetsov, first Deputy Chairman of the Bank of Russia, said in his speech at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that the digital ruble will eventually replace cash, but the transition period will be long. How is the Russian media and public reacting to all this news?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, honestly, from my impression, I think many Russians don't even know that the digital ruble exists. I bet that it would be the same in any country that is developing this stuff. Or maybe they've heard about it, but they don't really know what it is and they don't really care. Like, for example, you know, it's just really quickly going back to biometrics. There was a recent conference held by, I guess like a press conference held by TASS and one of these state-run public pooling companies. They found that only like 55% of Russians even knew what biometric IDs were, you know? The other half really had no clue. And I think it's the same with the digital ruble. I don't think Russians really understand what's coming at this point. I don't think any of us really do. I mean, it's quite scary. But yeah, of course, I mean, look, this idea that the digital ruble will always be voluntary and just a third form of currency that you can just use if it's convenient for you. I mean, come on, how naive do you have to be? And look, don't even start with, well, but the Russian government said that it'll always be voluntary. The Russian government said that vaccination would be voluntary. It was not voluntary. They'll say one thing one day and a week later they say the exact opposite. It's like, no, it's a government. I think we all know what governments do. And it's no different in Russia. So I don't find that to be a valid argument at all. Look, the digital ruble is absolutely no different than the CBDC that the EU is developing, or the Fed Now thing in the United States, or the digital peso. I don't even know what they're doing now. It's going to be a centralized current digital currency controlled by the Russian central bank, which is not even part of the Russian government and is fully obedient to the IMF. And they have already talked about how it's going to be fully transparent, programmable, trackable. The members of the Bank of Russia have bragged about how, oh, but now adults can use it to program their children's digital wallets so that they can't use their digital rubles to buy candy. Yeah, I'm sure that's what the digital ruble will be used for. That's why they developed this system, to stop Russian children from having too many sweets. Of course. How could I be so stupid? And something like the digital ruble, even if it really was developed for altruistic reasons, the potential for abuse is so high that no government on earth should be allowed to do this. It is totally unacceptable that they are introducing a currency that, you know, it'll basically give total, I mean, we're talking about a total control grid at this point. Every aspect of our lives will be, you know, recorded, documented, scrutinized. It's really dystopian, and people should understand what the digital ruble and other CBDCs mean.
I have also a question about the planned BRICS common currency. I was intrigued by the statement of Sergei Glaziev, a former Putin advisor, that the condition for Russia's victory is a turn to socialism. Glaziev is also the driving force behind Moscow's new and improved gold exchange and is aiming for the new BRICS single digital currency led by China and Russia to be backed by gold. To what extent is Glaziev's optimism about Russia's rise as the third financial power after China and India realistic? And do these ideas have support in government circles?
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and I think there's a lot of speculation, not a lot of hard facts that we can really work with. I really encourage people to think more deeply about this idea that BRICS represents this sort of very distinct and different economic bloc than the rest of the world, or is even offering the world something different. BRICS are fully on board with the World Health Organization. BRICS are fully on board with the World Trade Organization. BRICS are fully on board with the IMF. All they call for are reforms, maybe, within these systems so that it's more multipolar, whatever that means. But they're not leaving any of these groups. They love all these. They love the UN. They love Sustainable Development Goals, right? I mean, they're all interconnected. With, you know, for example, like with sanctions. So what Russia has been doing, or was doing until very recently, is they would export their oil, crude, to India, which would then refine it and sell it to Europe or to the United States. And so this idea, I mean, and Russia pays to transport gas across Ukraine. They're paying Zelensky to transport Russian gas across the country while they're in a not war. So again, okay, let's assume that there's a gold-backed BRICS peso. What does that mean for the average person? I think nothing. I really do. I think it would probably be used as just a new way to avoid like hyperinflation from the dollar or the euro or whatever. You know, it'll be considered a stable currency that important people can do business with, and the rest of us proles, you know, with our digital rubles and corona, you know, stopping children from eating their candy, stuff like this.
Riley, thank you for talking to us. Shall we go for a beer?
Dobrze.